imagine having the same car as your partner, and still losing all power without explanation while he flies around the track? Because that is exactly what happened to Lewis Hamilton in Japan, and the most shocking thing is not the crash in the race, but what Charles Leclerc later discovered in the data. A brutal, inexplicable, and potentially scandalous difference within Ferrari itself that could change everything. What happened with Lewis Hamilton in Japan was not a simple bad race, it was not a strategy error or an isolated problem that can be easily explained. It was something much deeper that began to develop from the first laps, and that little by little became a nightmare visible to everyone, because while other drivers maintained the pace, while his own team seemed competitive, he simply could not respond. He could not defend himself, he could not even stay in the fight despite being in a podium position at the beginning, which already had set off the first alarm bells within Ferrari and left a strange feeling even before knowing the real data. From the start of the race there were already clear signs that something was not right, because Hamilton reported a lack of power that did not fit with what the car should offer under normal conditions. And this was not something specific in a corner or at a specific moment, it was constant, persistent, as if the car was artificially limited on each straight, unable to deploy all the available energy, which left him completely exposed to his rivals and forced him to enter an unequal fight where he had no tools to really compete. But the truly shocking thing was not only what Hamilton felt inside the car, but what was happening right next to it, because Charles Leclerc, with exactly the same car, did have that performance. He could attack, he could defend himself and stay in competitive positions, which completely broke any simple explanation and turned the situation into a much bigger mystery, one that could not be justified with driving differences or strategic decisions, because the gap was too obvious to ignore. As the race progressed, Hamilton's fall became inevitable, going from fighting for the podium to constantly losing positions, without real resistance, as if he were racing in a different category, and this not only affected his result, but also began to generate enormous internal concern within the team, because when two identical cars show such different behaviors, the problem stops being individual and becomes structural, something that Ferrari could not afford at a key moment of the season. And this is where the real conflict of the act begins, because after getting out of the car, Hamilton not only shows frustration, but also makes a statement that changes everything, making it clear that he does not understand where this loss of power comes from and directly pointing out the difference with his teammate, a statement that not only puts pressure on the team, but also opens the door to an internal investigation that could reveal a much more serious problem than it initially seemed. This is the exact point where the story stops being a simple race and becomes a possible technical scandal within Ferrari, because now the question is no longer what happened to Hamilton, but why it happened only to him, while Leclerc, in the same car, demonstrated the complete opposite. This is where everything really explodes, because when Ferrari locks itself in to analyze the data after the race, what seemed like a strange problem begins to take shape as something much more serious. Something that not only explains Lewis Hamilton's fall, but also exposes a critical flaw at the heart of the modern Formula One car. And this is where Charles Leclerc becomes a key player in understanding what really happened. Because what the data reveals is not simply that Hamilton had less power, it is that his hybrid system was working completely incorrectly, out of synchronization in the most important moments of the lap, which means that the energy that should be recovered and deployed was never available when it was needed, creating a kind of constant vacuum and acceleration that left him sold on every straight, in every defense attempt, in every attack opportunity, something that in today's Formula One is practically a direct sentence to losing positions. Meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, Leclerc's car showed exactly the opposite, a clean, efficient energy flow perfectly aligned with the demands of the circuit, allowing him to maximize each corner exit and defend his position normally. And this is where the situation becomes completely incomprehensible, because we are not talking about radically different configurations or different external conditions. We are talking about the same car, the same team, the same technical package, with completely opposite results. This imbalance in energy management not only affects top speed, it affects absolutely everything, because when the hybrid system does not deliver power at the exact moment, the driver loses confidence in traction, loses consistency in pace, and begins to overcompensate in other areas, wearing out the tires more, forcing the car into corners and entering a vicious circle that is impossible to get out of during the race. And that perfectly explains why Hamilton was not only slow on the straight, but his overall performance plummeted lap after lap. But the most serious thing is not the failure itself, but what it implies, because according to what Leclerc suggests in that internal analysis, Ferrari did not have total control over how that system was working in both cars, which opens up enormous doubt about whether we are facing a software problem, a calibration problem, or even how each power unit responds individually, something that in the middle of the season can become a disaster if it is not corrected immediately. And this is where the act reaches its most tense point, because Hamilton is no longer talking about sensations, he is talking about data, he is talking about a real difference within the same team, and that forces Ferrari to face an uncomfortable reality. Not only are they fighting against their rivals on the track, they are also fighting against internal inconsistencies that can destroy any aspiration of competing at the highest level. This discovery completely changes the narrative, because it is no longer a bad race, it is a technical problem that can be repeated, that can reappear at any time, and that leaves Hamilton in an extremely vulnerable position if the team does not find an immediate solution. And this is where all this stops being an isolated technical problem and becomes a real threat within Ferrari, because the consequences of what Charles Leclerc revealed do not end in Japan. In fact, they are just beginning, and the first to set off all the alarms is Lewis Hamilton, who no longer speaks only from frustration, but from the concern that this failure could be repeated at any time. Because when a driver loses power so obviously, in a system as controlled as that of current Formula One, the normal thing would be to find a clear cause, a defective part, a specific error. But here there is no immediate answer, and that is what really aggravates the situation, because it means that Ferrari has not completely identified the origin of the problem, and that in the middle of the season is an extremely dangerous scenario. Hamilton makes it clear with his subsequent statements, where he practically demands urgent answers and solutions, even going so far as to propose changes to the power unit, something that is not requested lightly and that reflects the level of mistrust that has been generated. Because when a driver feels that he does not have the same tools as his teammate, internal fracture begins to be inevitable, and that can escalate quickly within a team that already lives under constant pressure. Meanwhile, Leclerc is left in a completely uncomfortable position, because although his data supports that his car was working correctly, it also indirectly confirms that Hamilton's problem is real, that it is not an excuse, that there is a tangible difference within the team, and that breaks one of the most important principles in Formula One: equal conditions between teammates, something that Ferrari cannot guarantee 100% right now. This opens up a much bigger scenario than it seems, because it no longer only affects a race, it affects internal confidence, the relationship between drivers, the credibility of the team, and above all, its aspirations in the championship. Because if this type of failure is repeated, Ferrari not only loses performance, it loses any possibility of competing against teams that do have a completely optimized and consistent system. And here is the real final blow of this story. Ferrari not only has to find the solution, it has to do it quickly, because the calendar does not wait, the races keep coming and the pressure is increasing, and if they cannot understand exactly what happened to Hamilton in Japan, this episode may be just the first of many, becoming a chronic problem that could mark the fate of their entire season. What started as a simple loss of positions is now transformed into a huge doubt that remains floating in the paddock. Was it a specific failure? Or are we facing a much deeper problem within Ferrari? And in the end, what this episode leaves behind is not only a bad race for Lewis Hamilton, but a very serious crack within Ferrari that cannot be ignored, because what Charles Leclerc revealed with the data completely changes the reading of what happened in Japan. Here there was no level playing field, here there was a car that worked, and another that simply could not compete. The key to all this is that we are not talking about sensations, nor driving styles, nor strategic decisions. We are talking about a real failure in the hybrid system, at the heart of the performance of a modern Formula One, something that left Hamilton completely exposed and without tools to fight, while his teammate demonstrated the true potential of the car. And that difference is what makes this case so worrying. Because if Ferrari is not able to guarantee that both cars operate under the same conditions, then the problem is no longer just technical, it is structural, it is internal, and it directly affects its credibility as a team that aspires to everything. And the worst of all is that these types of failures are not always solved overnight, especially when the origin is not entirely clear. Hamilton now demands answers. Leclerc confirms that something did not add up, and Ferrari finds itself at the center of an uncomfortable situation that could mark a before and after in its season, because if they cannot understand what really happened, the risk of it happening again is more present than ever. And so, what seemed like a simple result in Suzuka ends up leaving a much bigger question floating in the air, one that can define the immediate future of the team. Was it a specific failure? Or is it the symptom of a much deeper problem that they have not yet managed to control? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.